I've got a small collection of rocks here that I would like to polish, so I think in today's video I'm going to order a rock tumbler and we'll try it out. So yeah, these might not be the most exciting rocks. These are various things I've picked up over the years, and some of them are probably just very ordinary rocks, but especially when they're a bit wet, they did look a bit more interesting. Especially this one. I think I brought this back from Spain. Some kind of stripy stuff, most likely metamorphic. Some of these are probably just flints, actually, but that one does look like it might have something inside of it, possibly agate. And then we've got a whole load of these things which are probably some kind of feldspar type of thing. Rather interesting one here that's got green and red in it. If this was the Michigan Rocks channel, I'd probably be saying that's a piece of unakite, but I don't think it is a piece of unakite. I don't know what it is. Anyway, various bits of stuff. Some of it might not be very promising. Could be a bit of jasper there, not sure. Could just be a flint that's been heated in a fire. Anyway, I shopped around. There isn't a kind of huge choice of rock tumblers here in the UK, mainly because although the UK is quite geologically diverse, there isn't the kind of broad range of mineral samples to be had that there is in somewhere like the United States or Canada. And also we've got some pretty strict laws about where you can and can't collect rocks from. People have got into quite serious trouble from picking up and collecting rocks on certain beaches, for example. Now before we get to the actual rock tumbling, just to say I am approaching this as an amateur, and so I've learned a little bit about it, but not enough to be professional or fully competent. So some of the stuff you're going to see in this video probably will need correction. Please be gentle. Some of it might not, though. I happen to know, for example, that the word agate is pronounced agate in the place where I live, not agate as it might be in other parts of the world. So there's another reason to be careful with the corrections. Anyway, I managed to find a rock tumbler on Aliexpress and I'm going to order it. The rock tumbler itself I think is going to cost about £30-something, but then the shipping is going to be nearly £30 on top of that. But anyway, I'll order it up, we'll see what we get. A package has arrived. Let's open this up and see what we got. It's a little bit smaller than I thought it was going to be, but the measurements were on the listing, so that's just on me. Alright, well, that's all the packaging it had. The brand name is apparently KYNGTY.
You and all your silly English KYNGTY.
The precision instrument. Please do not collide. Okay, I won't. There's the drum. We'll have a look at that in a moment. Nice solid steel construction. One free roller, one driven roller. On this end, we've got some things for adjusting the rollers. We've got the on-off switch, which is still switched to on. So why wasn't that going round and round inside the box? Better turn that off. And again, just a little bit, flakes of paint coming off. Well, anyway. So yeah, quite happy with how that's constructed. There's a vent on the bottom for the motor. So nice painted metal construction. Seems nice and solid. Might just open that up so we can have a look at the motor. There's the drum, made of rubber. I'll find that in a minute. So we've got that, is the metal lid, and then there's the rubber lid that fits inside. That's quite normal for this kind of device. And then that screws onto there, and then in theory, I presume, yeah, that doesn't come off easily. The quality of the pressing on this part isn't the best. So then that goes into there. There's a little bit of clearance between that and that. I wonder if that thing is meant to be like that, so that it runs on there. I don't know. There are no instructions, so, you know, we just don't know. So I think what I'll do, we'll plug it in. I've got the Euro plug, so I've got to find an adapter for that. I will probably in the fullness of time cut that off and put a UK plug on there. Okay, I found my EU adapter, so that would go in there like that, and that will go in a UK socket. But Before we just go and plug this in and test it, I'm just going to take this panel off and have a look inside of here, because I want to make sure that the earth pin, the ground pin, is actually connected to the metal casing here. Since it is a metal cased item, I would like to be assured that it's earthed. Well, and also, you know, this has been shipped from China in a cardboard box. It's probably as well to just check nothing's shaken loose. Okay. Right, well, I can see. Yeah, it does look like. So that's switched. So the live is the one that's switched. The neutral goes to a wire nut. Well, I might also then take off this one. Actually, that's just as good. Okay, so yeah, so I will test the continuity of it as well, just to make sure that is the earth cable, but I'm sure it is because it's the green conductor that's coming out of this standard flex. So happy with that, actually, that there's a good ground connection to a metal screw there that's got continuity to the, well, I mean, the paint could be insulating it. So while we've got this open, let's just have a look and see what else we've got in here. So there's a what looks like maybe a shaded pole motor attached to a belt and pulley system. There's a little fan on there to keep the motor cool. But yeah, that looks all right. Right, I will put that all back together. Happy enough with the build and the electrical configuration. Okay, might as well actually test out my plug adapter at the same time. Yep, got continuity between the earth pin and the various exposed metal. I'll just check there isn't a short, so there's nothing between either of the other two pins. Alright, now that we've done a bit of due diligence on the KYNGTY, I think it's time to plug it in and switch it on. Alright. That is the sound of a motor binding, I would say. That's the sound of a motor not starting. Interesting. Okay, well, power off, and I think we better have it apart again. Okay, there are no capacitors inside this. We should be safe to take this apart straight away. Right, so let's have a look and see if we can figure out. Ah, right, okay. So something's catching on something. Do you know what it is? It's this fan. This fan is catching on the casing here. And I think that's because the belt is a little bit longer than it ought to be, perhaps. And the motor's been moved to the far right of its travel. So that can't work as it is at the moment. So choices here are take the fan off, probably not a great idea, get a shorter belt. I'll just shift this motor across, just slide that across like that, hands free, power back in. There we go. Right, that proves I'm not barking up the wrong tree. So that motor can't function like that. I probably shouldn't be messing around with this, but what I can't do here is just say, oh well, I'll return it because this came from China. And so the option to return it to the factory to have it sorted out by them doesn't really exist. The cost of returning it would be quite prohibitive. So that belt needs to go on there. That's on there now. Okay, so how far can this motor go before the fan blades? I think it might be alright actually. I think it might just be that they'd over-tightened it. So let's try that. I'll just tighten two of these for the moment. I don't know, it's a little bit on the slack side. There really isn't any more to play with there on the motor. Let's see what happens. Fingers clear, power back on. Well, that seems to work, but the question's going to be, what happens when I put the drum on? Right, well that kind of works. You could hear that noise you can hear is the tips of those fan blades touching the metal case. All right, now given that the tiniest nudge away from the case, power back in and we'll just see if we've fixed it this time. Okay, better. Yeah, it's not too bad. There's a fair bit of torque there. Right, so I've given that the tiniest little nudge. Good. Quiet. And yeah, there's still a fair bit of torque on that roller. So I'm not worried that that's going to slip or anything like that. That belt is providing enough torque for that drum to go in there and operate. And before I put that on, I'm just going to straighten up. Some of these bits need a little bit more bend on them. So I'm just going to grab some pliers and we just bend those in so that these bent edges are sitting straight on that thing. There's a tendency at the moment for them to just slip over the edge like that. And I don't think that's how they're meant to be. Right, so all of this adjustment, you shouldn't really have to do this, should you, when you buy a product? You shouldn't have to fiddle and faff around to get it into a working configuration. But we have to be charitable. This thing's been shipped all the way from China. If at some point that box was just knocked on that side, that motor may well have slipped towards the casing. I think they could have probably got away with a shorter belt here, like a 5mm shorter belt, and not had the motor quite so close to the case. Or put some other kind of fan in there. So that's the rock tumbler more or less ready to go. I thought, in addition to some of these rocks, I may not tumble all of them actually, because some of them are just, that's probably just a piece of granite or something like that. So I will be selective about some of these rocks, whether I polish them or not. I thought just to make things a bit more interesting, I'd order up some rocks. So these have arrived just today. And I bought these from an online store called The Stone Circle. I think they're in Scotland. And this is a collection of UK minerals. Another bag of them in there. Oh, and a bonus bag and so on. Let's just have a look. Thank you for buying. I added a calcite and a quartz piece from the Southern Uplands. Lapidary mix. And so we've got Scottish stones, crystals, including Southern Highlands smoky quartz, Perthshire and famous Ayrshire Angus agates. Yeah, see, look, it's not terribly dissimilar from the one I've picked up here. I do think that might just be a piece of flint, though, that's been pockmarked in a certain way that makes it look a bit like agate. But this one might well polish up quite interesting. Anyway, so we've got, oh, there's a piece of horn coral there. Recognise that from Michigan rocks. That I probably won't tumble because that's a kind of fossil specimen. And yeah, so we've got things like that, which is, again, could be similar to what I've got here. Something in a separate bag. All right, so these are the additional things. So that's a piece of calcite. And that's a piece of smoky quartz. That's such a nice crystal piece. I think these crystals are going to stay as specimens. So not all of this is going to get polished, and certainly there's too much here to go in all at once. Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting things here with banding and spots and dots and eyes. Anyway, gonna get the barrel from the rock tumbler and we'll select some of these and some of my own collection and we'll give them a tumble. This one here, this big banded one, I do want to tumble this, but I think that's too big to go in one piece. So I will cut that on my tile saw into several pieces. These two larger rocks I'm going to cut on the diamond wet saw. Now, for a variety of reasons, this will look a lot less safe than it really is. Rather than explain all of that all over again, I will link to a video in the description where I go through and test and explain the safety of this device. If you're at all worried about my safety procedures or my fingers, I do encourage you to go and have a look at that safety discussion. Anyway, let's get on and cut these rocks. This one I'm just going to cut it in half. I think it might just be an ordinary flint, in which case I won't tumble it. But if it's got something interesting inside, I might. This one's got some very nice stripes, so I'm hoping to cut a piece out of this which will tumble into an egg or marble shape. Alright, now this flint I think it is just fairly ordinary flint with some porosity. I don't think that's going to tumble very well because of all the voids. I was hoping I might find something kind of agate-y inside, but it doesn't look like it. So that's just going to go back in the garden. This stripy, interesting rock, well, remains stripy and interesting, and I've cut it into a very rough egg shape. So I'm going to tumble that. Hopefully that will knock all these sharp corners off and give us something interesting to look at. Alright, it's time to load up this rock tumbler and leave it running for a week. So that's the stripy rock that I cut. I've still got more than half of it left. So if there are any learning experiences from this half, I've still got another go round with the other bit. I think that one's going to tumble quite nicely as long as it's not too soft, because it's got some lovely stripes in it. Possible pitfalls with all of these rocks are, I don't know that they're all the same hardness. Very likely not all the same hardness. So some of them might tumble away to nothing, other ones might not at all. And they might damage each other, but they are what they are. Oh, I've also got this belemnite, which I picked up on Seatown Beach. It's not intact, it's got both ends missing, but I thought I might tumble that and see what that looks like when it's completely polished. So, and again, I'm kind of following guidance from Rob at Michigan Rocks here. So, tumbler about 2/3 full of rocks, silicon carbide grits, starting off with 80 grit. I'm going to put 3 tablespoons full of that in here. Now, rather than get silicon carbide all over my tablespoon measure, I measured 3 tablespoons full of sugar into this pot here and then tipped it back out. So that's my 3 tablespoons full of grit. And then water, just enough to almost cover the rocks. So just until I can see the water. There we go. I think I've got that right. Time will tell. Okay, metal lid on. And thumb screw done up tight. Just check that doesn't leak immediately. Doesn't seem to. Okay, well, off to the utility room and we'll set up the rock tumbler and set it going. Right, so a piece of anti-slip rubber, a metal tray just in case it leaks. So rock tumbler goes on there, that plugs into here, and switches on. Let's just make sure we have got power. Okay, and then the barrel goes in there, and off it goes. Not too noisy. Well, we'll check back in a week, I guess. Okay, that thing's been chugging away now for 2.5 days, and it's a little bit warm to the touch. Now, it did occur to me to wonder how much electricity this is going to use, and what's the cost of running this thing. So I've got it plugged into my measuring device here, and I've taken measurements over the course of 6 hours, and it's used 0.1 of a kilowatt hour in 6 hours. So I think that's pretty cheap. Just kind of figuring that out in my head, I reckon that's going to be about £1 a week or something to run, and probably about £5 a month. So in the 4 weeks, this will need 4 cycles probably, 3 different stages. One of those stages will probably need repeating. So 4 lots of 7 days. I reckon it's probably about a £5 to process a batch of rocks, but I'll put the exact figures on the screen. Okay, we are at the end of the 7 days of stage 1. So this has been grinding for a full week now. Time to turn it off. And we'll go and have a look and see what's going on inside of here. Now I'm going to work in the sink here, but this is a washing up bowl and colander that I've procured especially for this process. So none of the sediment is going to go down the sink here because that's really bad. The rock slurry that you get out of rock tumbling is just ground up rock, plus obviously the ground up grit that was added, but it's ground to a very fine texture, and if I was to pour it down the sink, it would settle and it would then set almost like concrete and block up the U-bend, so we won't be doing that. So unscrew the screw, pop off the metal lid. The other lid is eager to come off, so I'll just have that in there for now. So there are the rocks and the slurry. And what I'm expecting to find here is that everything's now got rounder corners on it. So I might as well fill this up while we're going. And use that for the first rinse. Rinsing out the barrel at the same time as rinsing off the rocks. Okay. Well, that looks pretty good. I can see some nice things in here. I do wonder how easy it's going to be to identify which of these rocks are which. Some of them will be more obvious than others. So I'll have a container of clear water so I can give them a proper rinse off completely. So that's my green and red rock that might be almost Unikite, but it isn't Unikite. Lovely and smooth. So I think what I'm going to be doing here is sorting these into rocks that need to go into another stage 1 and rocks that can go on to stage 2. So that's one of the ones I bought from the Stone Circle. That's nice. A little bit rough there, but I don't think that's going to go away. I think these little pockets of this round stuff is a little bit softer, so that's going to go on to stage 2. While we're here and we've got the camera, I'll have a look at this one here. That's pretty. I'm going to live with that little crease there, because I think if I tumble this away to try to get that out, we're going to lose too much of the rest of the rock. That one's lovely and smooth. I'll tell you what I have got to find in here. So this is the stripy boy. Didn't tumble to egg shape like I kind of imagined it might, but all of the sharp corners are gone, and that one can definitely go on to stage 2 now. This is one from my collection. It's probably one of those kind of granite type rocks, but it's very pretty now that it's polished up. I do like that. And smooth all over. This one's a bit of a mystery, because I don't know whether it's just a flint with some lighter patches or whether it's a piece of agate. I'm going to put that one back into stage 1 again for another tumble so we can take some more of this surface off and see if there's anything interesting under that. This is one of the purchased agates and it's looking nice, but still got quite a lot of rough on it, so that's going to go back into stage 1. This one is, I think that's a bit of chalcedony there, and that might be a kind of agatized pocket, but not a very pretty one in the middle there. That's going to have another tumble. Can't remember where this one came from. Oh no, I do remember picking this one up. So again, we've got, this one did look like it might just be a flint, but that inside of there is a lighter form of chalcedony than flint. So I think I was right to suspect that this one is something a bit more pretty than that, but still a bit pitted on this end, so that's going to go back into stage 1. Nice piece of jasper from the rock shop. A bit bumpy and lumpy, so back into stage 1. This was quite a bit bigger when it went in. This is, I think, a piece of banded chert. So it lost quite a lot of size. I think it came up here quite a bit more, but it's pretty. And I think that's ready for stage 2. There's no rough spots on it. This one's an agate. And it's very, very lumpy and bumpy. So that's going to go back into stage 1. That's another one of my weird granite things. A little bit rough on this end. Yeah, I think just a little bit rough on that end, so I might just give that. Yeah, and there's a little divot there. So that's going to go back into stage 1. Now this one. This is my... So that's what's left of that belemnite. Quite pretty, and it's kind of translucent. Not a lot left of that one. I don't think we can put that back into stage 1 again, so I think we'll promote that one onto stage 2. I don't know where that one came from, but I think it was quite a lot bigger when it went in first time. So I think this one might tumble away to nothing, because it does need another run in stage 1. It's still rough on the top there. So we might not even see that one again, but we'll take a chance. That's a piece of agate, but there's quite a lot of... Although I don't know that this is actually going to clean up at all anyway, without this bit tumbling away to nothing. So that, even though it's still bumpy on the host rock, I think that one's going to go on to stage 2. And then this one, which is a lovely piece of blue, transparent, again probably chalcedony, maybe agate. I'm not sure if there's any bands in. Oh, there might be some bands in there if they're faint, but lots of surface roughness, so that's going into stage 1 again. So that's it for the rocks. We haven't got an awful lot to go on to stage 2, so I think I'm going to run stage 1 again with some more rocks. Now this bowl of slurry, can't just tip that away. Most of that is bits of rock, bits of the grit, possibly some little particles of rubber, which will probably settle on top. I'm going to put this out in the utility room, we're going to let it settle. We'll pour any clear water off into the garden somewhere, and the solids I will just save, because we've got some construction projects coming up. I'll probably just mix it in with the cement, and that way it won't have to pollute anything. There's potential to actually use this stuff. It's powdered rock, so there's potential to actually use it for improving soil, but you do need to be a little bit careful about what's going in there. So here's what happens next. These rocks need to go on to stage 2, but not yet. These need another tumble in stage 1. So those are going to go in there. There's not enough in there. So, additionally, some other rocks which need their stage 1. Now I won't do before and after photos of these, but these are some more rocks from my various collections. Another piece of banded chert there, I think. Little piece of carnelian, maybe. That's an agate, but I've got a feeling that's going to tumble away to nothing. Still, we've got to give it a go. I don't even know how that got in there. It just looks like a piece of flint. Oh well, let's see what happens. That's the offcut from my stripy boy. From this one. Somewhere like that, maybe. Not really sure what that one will do, but we'll chuck it in anyway. 80 grit. 3 tablespoons full, or thereabouts. Water until we can just see it. I'd say it's a little bit underfilled, that barrel, but it is what it is. Okay, just make sure we've got no leaks. Doesn't seem to be. Right, and then back in the tumbler. So that goes in there. And away we go for another week. Right, it has been another week, so it's time for another round of open the tumbler and see what we get. So this is the second round of stage 1. So some of the rocks went back in and some of these are new rocks. So once again we've got slurry in there, a bit greyer this time, less red. Probably a lot of that is to do with the composition of the rocks we've been tumbling. Right, so not very sure what this one is. I think it might just be an ordinary flint. So I don't know that there's going to be anything interesting in there. This one, well, I'm not sure again what that is. That's one that came from, I think it's an agate. That's one that came from the stone circle. I don't think we're going to get that to tumble any further without losing a lot of it, because there's these big concavities here. So that's going to go on to stage 2. That's one of my weird granite type rocks. Not actually granitoid probably, although there is a little bit of pink feldspar in there. Yeah, that's good to go on to stage 2. Now, I've heard a lot of people say don't tumble granite because it just goes all rough and horrible, but these have actually turned out really nice and smooth. Adding them to the others, which I've kept wet. So this is the ones that were okay at the end of stage 1. Maybe some kind of rhyolite or something. Very subtle patterning in there, but quite nice, and it's lovely and smooth all over. So that's going on to stage 2. Nice piece of possibly chalcedony. Big crack in it there. Really, that probably should be broken in half and tumbled as 2 separate things. I think it's going to break on its own, so I think that one's probably going to have to stay out. Nice piece of quartz here. Lovely and smooth. A few little sort of bands or striations or something. That's going in the stage 2. This is the offcut of that stripy one, which I think is probably poor quality onyx. Well, it's smoothed up quite nicely. It's got some interesting shape in there. I think I probably should have broken that into pieces, but I haven't. Yeah, no, I think that's in the no pile. That's a piece of chalcedony, but it needs a lot more. It needs a lot more tumbling to make it worthwhile. Yeah, don't know what that is, but it's ready to go on to stage 2. It's got a little bit of roughness around here, but I don't think that's going to tumble away. Piece of jasper. This is my other piece of very faintly banded chert, but it's nice and smooth. The bands are still just about there. That'll go on. Again, this is a piece of chalcedony, but I think it's got a pocket of agate in the middle there. It's just not a very interesting colour. It's all a bit greyish, but this has got a bit of purplish to it here. So I mean, that could be there could be something a bit like amethyst, but it's probably more like the Lime Bay chalcedony. That can go on. If you happen to recognise any of these rocks, then do let me know in the comments, but include a timestamp so we can all see what you're talking about. I think that one's good to go. This really thin agate here. Some very nice visible bands in there. So that's the one. I don't even know how that got in there. I think it might have come in the box from the stone circle. It is just a piece of flint as far as I can see. It's polished up really nice and smooth on this side, but the cortex hasn't come off. That's going to be a no. I still can't decide about this one, whether that is something, whether that's just a piece of flint or chert with faults in it, or whether these are porphyritic type of crystals. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that one can definitely go on. That's possibly the nicest specimen of the lot. Yeah, we'll definitely put that one in the next stage. An interesting little possible agate. I have a feeling that might be the one that I said I didn't think I'd see again, and I'm not far wrong. Piece of quartz, another piece of quartz, unknown, pinkish sort of rock. That's probably a no. I think that one could go in again. I think that could go on, and that one's still a bit rough. And then there's this tiny little chip here, which I think we'll put in anyway, because we are going to need something to support the rest of these rocks while they're being tumbled. So that's the collection of stones that are going on to now stage 2 for a finer grit tumbling for another week. So a bit of a clean-up to do here, and it did occur to me to wonder whether this finely ground dust, rock dust we've got in here, this slurry, could be used as a ceramic medium, so like clay. We have essentially made something a bit like clay here. This is very, very finely ground rock. So could it be fired as clay? Well, I don't think so. I dried some out, and it has almost no physical strength. Very, very little plasticity as well when it was moist like clay. It felt like clay, but you try and bend it and it just broke. So it's probably just not the right minerals, or perhaps not weathered in the right way to be clay. I suppose it probably could be ground up and used as grog in clay. It might have some potential as a glaze, I'm not sure. Depends a lot on the composition of the minerals that we were grinding up. Since I haven't been excellent at identifying those, it's a bit difficult to say what this might be. Also, of course, this has got the silicon carbide in there that's all ground up. So I'll dry this out because you can't put this down the drain. So I'll dry this out. I'll probably mix it in. We've got some cement that we're going to mix up soon, so I'll mix it in with some concrete or something and it'll just become part of that. Right, stage 2 of tumbling, which is actually the 3rd session, but it's the 2nd grit, if you know what I mean. So I've done 2 lots of the 1st grit. Now we're moving on to the 2nd grit. It's not really quite full up enough, and the danger here is that these rocks will bang together when they're being tumbled, and that will bruise them or chip them. So I'm going to just top that off with a little bit of sea glass. I think most people who do rock tumbling in any kind of serious fashion use ceramic tumbling media for this, which is little pieces of ceramic that just support the stones while they're rumbling around, but also it gets into all the little crevices because they're small particles and they can kind of get in and scour inside concave areas. I don't have any ceramic tumbling media, so I'm going to use some of my sea glass. This is natural sea glass that I just picked up at Lyme Regis. I say I picked up, Jenny and I both picked this up. We had a competition to see who could collect the most sea glass. Jenny won. That should not only support those rocks, it's a little bit softer than the rocks and the grit, so it won't scratch them. And this is my 2nd grit, which is 400 grit, I think. So quite a lot finer than the first 2. I'm going to go for about 3 tablespoons full again. Actually needs a little bit more than that. There we go. And this is the grit that's going to put a kind of almost shine on it. Water, just until I can actually see the surface of the water around the rocks. That's good. Lid on. If I was going to be really fastidious, I probably should have really scrubbed all of this down to make sure there's no traces of tiny pieces of grit. I'm not going to be that rigorous. The other lid on, the top on. Okay, make sure we got no leaks. That's good. I'll give that a wipe down. That will go back on the tumbler for another week now. So that goes in there. And then away we go for another week. Okay, I would rather have done this in broad daylight. We're now at the end of day 4 of the fine grit tumbling. And the barrel was kind of bulging at the end, and that pushed the metal disc against the metal casing of the tumbler, which didn't seem all that good. The bulging end of the tumbler was also rubbing on the other end of the casing, and so it was shaving off little bits of rubber off the bottom of the barrel. Not really happy with that, so I'm going to tip this out and see what's going on. I might have overloaded the barrel, I think. There's stuff actually stuck on the bottom of the barrel there. I think it's possible that I just had too much stuff in there and it's somehow jammed it. It's like stuck in the bottom of the barrel. Why would it be stuck there? The good news is I can't feel any grittiness there, so I think we probably have exhausted the grit. So perhaps this was a good time to stop anyway. I will sort that out later. Everything feels very lovely and smooth, much more so than it did after initial grinding. So we might be ready to move on to the polishing stage. I'm going to dry off one of these rocks, see how much shine it's got when it's dried off. Obviously we still haven't done the polishing stage, but this will give me an idea of how far off we are. Yeah, so no, it's still completely dull, but very, very smooth. So I think we might be almost ready to go on to the polishing stage. Yeah, there's a few little bits there that I have actually polished smooth. I'll check a couple of others. I think I might put them back in the barrel with just some plain water and a little bit of detergent just to wash all the grit off them and run them overnight. Tomorrow we'll start the polishing cycle. So even the sea glass that I put in there instead of tumbling media is a lot less frosted than it was when it went in. Anyway, there we are. It's about 2/3 full. I'm actually just going to put that in there with water and a tiny little drop of washing up liquid. Okay, change of plan. I ran that for a minute and I wasn't liking the bumping of the rocks in here. There's nothing to cushion those rocks from banging into each other. So, perhaps, against my better judgment, the sea glass is going in. That's going to run overnight. Hopefully that'll be a bit better. Yeah, that sounds a whole lot better. So, all downhill from here really. We've got these rocks. They are beautifully smooth, but not shiny. Anyway, that's all got to go in there. I think I probably will put the glass in as well. Obviously the volume of all of this has gone down quite significantly as it's ground away the outside of it. And then this is the polish. This is the stage 3 polish, which is cerium oxide. Very fine powder. I'm going to put in an amount that is equivalent to about 3 tablespoons full in there. I think it might be too much. I'll have water until I can just see the rocks covered, about like that. Lid on. It's very strange. This doesn't seem to have a very positive fit in this drum. So if anything's wrong at all with this set, the drum just seems really weird and perhaps missing something in terms of quality or build or something. Anyway, right, that goes on. So you can see here where it's rubbed against the end of the machine, and you'll see the same on the other end as well. Anyway, so that now goes back on for maybe longer than a week, so it might be like 10 days. Now there was a little bit of leakage. You can see the cerium oxide, or the grinding sort of mixture, has leaked out and spread itself all around the outside of the lid here. So I will talk a little bit about the machine, make this a proper review I suppose, in just a moment. Right, well there's what we've got. A foamy brew. I think some of my pieces of sea glass might be ground down to almost nothing. Or I suppose polished down would be a more accurate description. Okay, right, that's that. Well, they look nice, but that's because they're wet. So let's just get a sneak preview. Well, I can feel some little irregularities in the surface here. So anyway, let's get my favourite rock out. Oh, there it is. Right, that's my favourite rock, which is the piece of, I don't know, I don't think that is KYNGTY, but it's a piece of greenish rock with reddish, that could be jasper even actually rather than feldspar, so it might be something else. Anyway, right, I'll rinse that off completely and I'll get that dry and then we'll see if it's shiny. Well, it is but perhaps not as much as I might have hoped. But that could be the nature of this rock rather than the process. So you can still see a little bit of the texture of the underlying rock there. Maybe it needed longer on stage 2, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to get these all rinsed off and dried off, and then we'll have a look and see how shiny we've got, and we'll make a decision on whether we need to do another polishing stage, maybe another 5 days with the cerium oxide, with a fresh batch of cerium oxide. Right, so all of the rocks are tumbled as far as I'm going to take them, which is a kind of standard 4-week cycle. I think what we'll do is review the machine, finish off the review of the machine first, and then we'll have a look at the rocks. So the machine, well, it ran constantly for 4 weeks and did pretty well, and seems to have fared okay. There were 1 or 2 things that were a little bit weird. So I think first we'll talk about the barrel. The way this barrel fits together, I think this is a fairly standard configuration for a rock tumbling barrel. It's just it didn't feel like it was closing completely positively. It's going to confound me now by closing very tight. It just didn't feel like that was closing completely airtight. In fact, it did leak a little bit. On the polished tumble, some of the cerium oxide came out. I believe the way this is supposed to work is that this tapered edge of the lid is supposed to squeeze in this rim, and then when this screw is done up tight, that pulls this lid back out against that now tapered rim. It's just that this lid doesn't exactly fit very tight on there, and therefore when this is screwed up tight, I don't know, it just felt like maybe it wasn't quite as watertight as it could be. Maybe I did it wrong. Anyway, so that's the barrel. I feel like maybe the barrel is not of the same high standard that you might get on a more expensive machine. The other thing is that the clearance of the barrel in the machine, well, what's that? There's about 5mm clearance there. And at one point, whatever was going on inside the barrel here caused a bit of pressure to develop, and this bottom end of the barrel here bulged out. And it bulged out and rubbed against this metal here and this edge, and it's shaved a bit of the rubber off. I don't know how normal that is, but I feel like a little bit more clearance, just, I don't know, even like another 10mm in the manufacture of this product would have given the barrel enough clearance that it wouldn't rub. Now at this end, maybe that was supposed to be fixed by using this little nubbin here and putting that there so that it rides against that instead of the metal riding on the metal. But if you do that at the other end, this flat piece would just cut into this rubber. So I'm not even sure that's what these are supposed to be for, although I can't think what else they might be for. You can see that there are shavings of rubber that have come off here, off of the barrel. And these little bits here are bits of the grinding mixture that have leaked out of this seal of the barrel and worked its way down there and dried out. Hopefully didn't work its way into the bearings, because the grinding paste in those bearings will just wear that metal away over time. Anyway, I think overall, I don't know what else you could expect for this price. It's a very well and solidly built machine in general for the price I paid, which was about £30. There aren't better options than this for that price point. I think to get a machine that would probably look a lot like this but is maybe tuned and professionally graded and maybe uses a better quality barrel, you're talking about £200–300. So I think it's value for money. I don't think it's about to wear out or anything like that. I reckon that can probably run continuously for a year if necessary. The barrel might need replacement earlier than that. So I think the machine, my opinion of the KYNGTY rock tumbler is, yeah, it's pretty good value actually, considering. And I think if I'd spent the same amount of money on one that's a bit more of a kind of hobby based, or the National Geographic one, or one of those kind of branded ones that's marketed more towards kids, I don't think I'd have got so much of a machine for my money. I'm pretty happy with the machine. I think for the price, it's probably pretty remarkable. So now let's have a look at the rocks and indeed sea glass. These are all dry now. So any gloss sheen you're seeing on there is gloss. Really mixed results here, and there are probably a couple of reasons for that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's have a look at some of the rocks that polished really well first. So this one, which I think is a piece of banded chert, not particularly conspicuous bands, but you can see them there, has polished to a more or less glass-like sheen. There is a little bit of sort of dullness there, but that's possibly one that's polished perhaps best of all. So that's a good one. This piece of jasper is polished reasonably well, a little bit on the dull side. This is a piece of chalcedony, and it has polished very nicely. It's still got lumps and bumps and cavities and so on that haven't polished, but yeah, feels quite smooth, almost like glass. And we can see some of the translucency there and see the pattern of the inside of the rock. So that's a good one. My piece of onyx or fake onyx or low quality onyx or whatever this is has polished nicely in places. The translucent bit up the top here is polished better than the more sandy bit at the bottom. But all in all, I think that's not a bad result. Probably the nicest overall is this, and I think it's just a piece of flint, but it had a sort of dark grey cortex on it, which is almost completely worn away, and so we've got some nice translucency there. But also, there are little traces of the dark staining of the original cortex on there. So that's nice. This little carnelian, I think it is, has polished quite smooth. My green and red rock is a little bit dull in places. And then a lot of these grainy things like this, which I think is a piece of maybe porphyritic rhyolite or something. Yeah, you can see quite a lot of imperfections there in the surface, corresponding with the darker grains. So, which I think is the kind of granity type of matrix material. And the same's true of the other granites and granitoids. So the lighter bits have polished really nicely. The darker bits have stayed quite rough. These actually look a little bit worse than they did after the second phase, after the second stage of polishing. Perhaps the most shiny of the lot is this piece of, I think that's probably carnelian. Really nice and shiny. Obviously lots of divots in it, but the bits that are protruding polished up nicely. This little agate, you can see the bands in here. Here's one where you can actually see some bands. These odd stones with the little granules in them haven't gone shiny at all. In some places the little nodules inside them, which look like they might be rose quartz or something, have gone a bit shiny, but the rock itself, the matrix rock, not so much. And again, these feel rougher now than they did when they came out of the second stage grit, which is kind of weird. There's a nice shiny one. I'm not sure what that actually is. I think that might just be a piece of chert. But it's come up really nice and shiny. That's all that's left of my little belemnite. And it didn't shine up. And it broke into several pieces. I think that's just had too much tumbling, to be honest. And I think it might have actually been beaten up by the larger rocks a bit. Nice piece of quartz there. That's taken a decent shine. And another piece of banded chert, again, nice and smooth. There are some rough patches there where it's just undercut a little bit, because that material, that lighter material, obviously is a little bit softer than the darker grey. The quartz has all done pretty well. I don't know what that is, just a random rock I picked up in a car park, I think. Probably needs to go through again. The sea glass is interesting because it's a lot smoother, not quite clear on the outside, not quite polished clear on the outside, but a lot smoother, a lot less frosted. It's a lot sort of more silky feeling. Some bits have gone almost completely clear. So a lot smoother. But I think less interesting, to be honest. I think one of the things I like about sea glass is how frosted it is. And so when it's polished like this, it's just bits of glass. So it's a bit paradoxical, really, because when it's polished up to more of a sort of gem-like appearance, it doesn't feel quite as excitingly treasure-like. I like it less. So what went well and what went not so well? I think, well, we got some lovely shiny rocks out of here, so the process obviously does work. We've got some beautifully shiny, polished rocks here, and they sound different as well. So some things ground really well and polished really well, others not quite so much. And what's the reason for that? Probably the key reason is this is just an assortment of different rocks. This is not a coherent collection. This is not all of one type of rock. And so when you've got softer and harder and rougher and smoother rocks in the mix, what will be happening in the tumbling process is this rock, for example, is busy trying to get smooth, and this rock is busy rubbing against it, making it rough. So I think if I'm going to repeat this, I'm going to do it with a collection of rocks which are all of the same type and the same hardness, and probably closer to the same size as well. And hopefully that will give me a more consistent tumbled result. I think probably there should have been another stage 2 grinding process. I think probably with the medium grit, there probably should have been another grinding process just to get them really smooth, because when we look really closely at some of these, the bits that aren't perfect are scratches that the polishing process can't possibly take out. Some of this stuff that's not polished as well as I would like, here's one I think that's a fairly good example. That dullness in there, when you look at it under a magnifying glass, what you actually see is little nicks and scratches that the final polishing process can't possibly have dealt with. That should have been ground off by a bit longer in the mid-stage grit. So at the end of my amateur bumbling with this, the lessons I think I need to take away are understand the rocks a little bit better. So I need to understand the rocks and make sure that I know what the rocks are, make sure I know how they're going to polish. For example, I think there's just no reason to expect that these granites or granitoids will polish nicely. They looked like they were going to when we were at the middle stage, but in the polish, they didn't get there. So reasonable expectations is one thing. Better rocks. Start with better rocks. So these rocks, for example, with big concave sections are always going to have big concave sections unless you tumble that away to the point that there's almost nothing left. So expectations for that one, you've got to expect that it's going to have shiny spots and dull spots. I still think it's quite nice actually like that. And probably a little bit more patience. So probably just another stage of tumbling and accept that it's going to take an extra week of the mid-stage grind. But I think for my first ever attempt at rock tumbling, I don't think this is an absolute failure. There's a lot to be happy about here. We've got some really nice things that I just enjoy holding and looking at. So that's got to count as a good result. And I'm going to have another crack at this. But I think what I will do is I'll leave it a little while. I'm going to wait for your feedback and your gentle corrections. And perhaps we'll have another go in a month or two with different rocks, or maybe some of the same rocks again, and have another crack at rock tumbling. But it has been really interesting just to see these transform. It is interesting that my favourite 5 rocks out of this whole batch, well, only one of them is from the batch I bought. These are rocks that were in my collection or I picked up in various places. I think this one might have even come out of the garden. So I didn't need to go very far afield to find some rocks that I'm going to be really happy with. So that was my first attempt at rock tumbling, and is a kind of informal review of the KYNGTY budget rock polisher from Aliexpress. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.